I used to think my marriage to Laura was unshakable. For 10 years, we had what I thought was a rock-solid partnership. Laughter, mutual respect, and a rhythm that came with knowing each other so well. Laura was my best friend, my partner in everything. She was smart, beautiful, and funny, the kind of person who lit up a room without even trying. If someone had told me a year ago that she could betray me, I would have laughed in their face. But now, as I sit here trying to piece everything together, I can't help but wonder when it all started to crumble. Looking back, the first cracks were so small that I barely noticed them. It wasn't one big event that made me question Laura. It was a series of little things. She started coming home later than usual, blaming it on work deadlines or last-minute errands. At first, I believed her. Why wouldn't I? We'd built a life on trust. Then, there was her sudden obsession with her appearance. Laura always cared about how she looked, but this was different. She started wearing dresses she hadn't touched in years, bought new lingerie I'd never seen before, and spent hours in front of the mirror before leaving for charity events. When I asked her about it, she laughed and said, "I just want to feel good about myself. Is that a crime?" I shrugged it off, but something about her tone didn't sit right with me. The real doubts crept in when I noticed her phone habits change. Laura used to leave her phone lying around, screen up, answering texts or calls without a second thought. But now, she kept it glued to her hand. She started turning it face down on the table, silencing notifications, or walking into another room to take calls. When I teased her about it, she brushed me off, saying, "Work stuff, John. Nothing exciting, trust me." Only I didn't trust her. Not anymore. Then there were the credit card statements. One evening, while paying off some bills, I noticed strange charges. Expensive dinners at places we'd never been together. Boutique purchases from stores she'd never mentioned. I asked her about them, and she waved it away, laughing nervously. "Those are for the gala auction donations," she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. But it wasn't obvious to me, and it didn't feel right. That night, lying in bed beside her, I stared at the ceiling while she slept soundly next to me. For the first time in our marriage, I felt a knot of unease in my chest. Something was wrong, but I couldn't prove it. Not yet. I told myself I was being paranoid, that Laura couldn't do something like that to me. But a voice in the back of my mind whispered, "What if she already has?" The next few weeks were torture. I tried to shake off the unease, to convince myself that I was imagining things, but the signs kept piling up. Laura's late nights became more frequent, and her excuses started to feel rehearsed. "I'm heading out to meet the girls," she'd say, avoiding my eyes as she slipped on her heels. "Which girls?" I asked one evening, trying to sound casual. "Oh, you don't know them. New friends from the charity group." That was another thing, this charity group she was suddenly so involved with. Laura had always done her part for the community, but this was different. Weekly meetings, last-minute events, and weekend retreats. It was as if she'd become a completely different person, one whose life didn't include me anymore. I tried not to let it show, but the nagging suspicion gnawed at me. Every time she left the house, I felt like a fool standing there, pretending not to notice the way she rushed out, barely kissing me goodbye. One night, as I was loading the dishwasher, I noticed her work bag on the counter. She'd forgotten it in her rush to leave. For a moment, I stared at it, debating whether I should look inside. My stomach churned with guilt. I wasn't the kind of man who went through his wife's things. But the doubt, the lingering unease, was too much. I unzipped the bag and rifled through it, trying to be quick. There was nothing unusual at first. Her planner, a couple of receipts, and some hand cream. Then I found it. A sleek black card with gold embossing. It read, "Club Nocturn." What the hell is this? I muttered to myself. I turned the card over, finding only a small logo and an address printed at the bottom. No details, no explanation. I'd never heard of the place, but something about it felt off. Why would Laura have a card for some club she'd never mentioned before? When she came home later that night, I asked her how her meeting went. "Fine," she said, kicking off her shoes and avoiding my gaze. "Do you know anything about Club Nocturn?" I asked casually. Her reaction was instant. She froze for just a second, long enough for me to notice before laughing nervously. "Oh, that's nothing. One of the women from the charity gave me a card. It's just a silly social club." "A social club?" I pressed. "Yeah," she said, brushing it off like it was no big deal. "Nothing you'd be interested in. A bunch of ladies drinking overpriced cocktails and gossiping." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I let it go for the moment, but that night, as I lay in bed again, the doubts burned brighter. I didn't believe her, not for a second. After finding that card, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The words Club Nocturn felt like a splinter lodged in my mind, something I couldn't ignore. Laura's explanation had been too smooth, too rehearsed. I didn't buy it for a second. The next day, I decided to dig deeper. While Laura was at work, or wherever she claimed to be, I pulled out my laptop and searched for Club Nocturn. The results were strange. There was no website, no social media presence. Just a handful of vague mentions on forums, mostly from people asking about it. The general consensus was that it was an exclusive private club, invitation only, catering to a very niche crowd. The kind of place you didn't stumble upon unless you were meant to. I found the address printed on the back of the card and decided to check it out myself. It was in a part of town we rarely visited, tucked between a high-end spa and a boutique hotel. When I arrived, I saw nothing but a plain black door with no signage, just the same gold logo from the card. A security camera perched above it, watching everyone who came near. I didn't try to go in. Not yet. Instead, I parked across the street and waited, my pulse racing with anticipation. An hour passed, then two. Finally, the door opened and a couple walked out. A man in a tailored suit and a woman wearing a dress that left little to the imagination. They were laughing, holding hands, and looking like they didn't have a care in the world. I stayed in the car, watching as more people came and went, each one dressed like they were heading to some elite cocktail party. My stomach churned. This wasn't some casual social club Laura had described. This was something else entirely. When I got home that night, Laura was already there, curled up on the couch with a glass of wine. "Hey," she said, glancing up. "You're home late." "Just ran some errands," I said, keeping my voice steady. She smiled, but I noticed how quickly she locked her phone and set it down face down on the table. I wanted to ask her about Club Nocturn again, to confront her outright, but I wasn't ready. Not yet. Instead, I spent the next few days gathering more information. I started checking her phone whenever I had the chance. Not reading her texts, but looking at her call logs and browsing history. She was careful but not careful enough. I found a series of messages with someone listed as L. The conversations were vague, but there was something intimate about them. Something that made my chest tighten. L. "Same time next week? Can't wait to see you again. Laura." "Of course. You know how much I look forward to it." Then there was the browsing history searches for high-end lingerie stores, articles about power dynamics in relationships, and even a bookmarked page titled, "Exploring Desires Safely." My heart sank. Whatever Laura was involved in, it wasn't innocent. That night, as she slept soundly beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I had to know the truth. I couldn't live like this, drowning in suspicion and doubt. I decided to follow her. A week later, my opportunity came. Laura had another one of her charity meetings scheduled for the evening. She kissed me goodbye as usual, barely sparing me a second glance as she rushed out the door. The moment her car disappeared down the street, I grabbed my jacket, got into my own car, and followed her. My heart pounded as I trailed her through the city, staying just far enough behind to avoid suspicion. She drove to a side of town I barely recognized. High-end boutiques, private offices, and upscale restaurants. Eventually, she turned onto a narrow street and parked in front of the same black door I'd seen earlier. Club Nocturn. I pulled over a block away, my hands trembling as I watched her step out of the car. She was wearing a dress I'd never seen before. Black, form-fitting, with a plunging neckline. Her heels clicked against the pavement as she approached the door, holding up her card to what looked like a scanner. The door buzzed open, and she disappeared inside. I sat there for a long time, staring at the closed door. I couldn't believe what I'd just seen. The woman I thought I knew better than anyone had lied to my face. She wasn't at a charity meeting. She was here at this secretive, exclusive club, dressed like she was going on a date. Every part of me wanted to barge in, demand answers, and expose whatever she was hiding. But I knew that wasn't the way to handle this. Not yet. Instead, I waited. An hour passed. Then two. My mind raced with every possibility of what could be happening inside. Was she meeting someone? Was it worse than I imagined? Finally, the door opened, and Laura walked out. She wasn't alone. She was laughing, her hand lightly resting on the arm of a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit. The way she looked at him made my stomach churn. It was the kind of look she used to give me. They stood there for a moment, talking softly. Then he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a quick peck on the cheek or a polite goodbye. It was passionate, lingering, and unmistakably intimate. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Every rational thought in my brain screamed at me to stay calm, to not do something stupid, but all I could see was red. After the kiss, they said a few more words before the man walked away, disappearing into the night. Laura got into her car and drove off, completely unaware that I'd been watching. I stayed in my car for a long time, staring at the empty street and trying to process what I'd just seen. Laura had betrayed me, and now I had proof. Couldn't sleep that night. Laura came home around midnight, slipping into bed as if nothing had happened. Her soft breathing beside me felt like an insult. I stared at the ceiling, trying to figure out what to do next. The next morning, over coffee, I watched her carefully. She was scrolling through her phone, humming softly to herself, the perfect picture of a devoted wife. It made my stomach turn. "Late night," I said, keeping my tone casual. She glanced up, her smile as fake as the lies she'd been feeding me. "Yeah." The meeting ran longer than expected. A lot to go over. I nodded, swallowing the bile rising in my throat. "Must have been exhausting." She shrugged. "It's all for a good cause." I wanted to scream at her, to shove the truth in her face, but I held back. If I confronted her without more than what I'd seen, she'd twist it, deflect, and somehow make me doubt myself. I needed more than just my word against hers. So I dug deeper. Over the next few days, I turned into a man obsessed. I installed a tracker on her car, synced her phone to mine, and even planted a small camera in her bag when she wasn't looking. I hated what I was doing, but I needed answers. What I found was worse than anything I could have imagined. The man she'd kissed outside the club, his name was Thomas. He was a prominent member of Club Nocturn, someone who seemed to hold sway over its members. Through her texts and emails, I pieced together their arrangement. It wasn't just an affair. It was a carefully orchestrated double life. Thomas wasn't just a fling. He was someone she'd chosen to explore a different side of herself with, a side she'd deliberately hidden from me. They exchanged messages filled with intimate details, secret plans, and references to things I didn't understand. "Thomas, can't stop thinking about last night. You looked incredible. Laura, I'm glad you liked it. You bring out a side of me I didn't know existed." I felt like a voyeur, reading their words and glimpsing the connection they shared. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional. She confided in him in ways she no longer did with me. One message hit me harder than the rest. "Laura, I don't think John would ever understand this part of me. I love him, but I need more." The betrayal wasn't just in her actions. It was in her words, her thoughts, the way she'd written me off as someone incapable of being enough for her. That night, as she lay asleep beside me, I stared at her, wondering how I'd missed the signs. Was I so blinded by my love for her that I didn't see what she'd become? I knew what I had to do. This wasn't just about confronting her anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity and making her feel the weight of what she'd done. The plan for my revenge started forming that night. I spent the next week meticulously crafting my revenge. Confronting Laura in private wasn't enough, not for what she'd done. I wanted her to feel the same humiliation and betrayal I felt every time I looked at her, every time I thought about Thomas and Club Nocturn. I started by compiling everything I had. Photos from the tracker, screenshots of their messages, even footage from the hidden camera in her bag. It was all there, clear as day, undeniable proof of her deceit. Then I made my first move. One evening, I casually brought up the annual charity gala we attended every year. Laura lit up at the mention of it, her excitement almost sickening. "Oh, I was going to ask if we could go," she said, practically bouncing in her seat. "It's always such a big event, and this year's theme is going to be amazing." I nodded, masking the rage simmering beneath the surface. "Of course, we can't miss it." The gala would be the perfect setting. A room full of people who knew us, respected us, even envied us. People who thought we had the perfect marriage. By the time I was done, they'd see the truth. In the days leading up to the event, I reached out to a few key people. Close friends, family members, and even a couple of Laura's co-workers. I framed it as wanting to discuss something important about the gala, ensuring they'd all be there. Then I reached out to Thomas. Using one of Laura's burner email accounts, I sent him an invitation to the gala, making it sound like a romantic gesture from her. "Meet me there," I wrote. "I want to show you off." It was risky, but I knew his arrogance wouldn't let him resist. He'd show up, expecting a secret rendezvous, completely unaware that he was walking into a trap. On the night of the gala, I dressed in my best suit, playing the part of the devoted husband. Laura looked stunning, as always, in a deep red dress that hugged her figure. She spent extra time getting ready, likely hoping to catch Thomas's attention. "You look beautiful," I said as she walked into the living room. She smiled, but there was a flicker of guilt in her eyes. "Thanks, honey. You clean up pretty well yourself." I clenched my jaw, forcing a smile. "Shall we?" The drive to the gala was silent, but my mind was racing. Every detail of the night was planned down to the second. By the end of it, Laura wouldn't just be exposed. She'd be shattered. The ballroom was a picture of elegance. Crystal chandeliers, white-clothed tables adorned with flowers, and the hum of polite conversation filling the air. Laura stepped into the room like she owned it, her confidence radiating as she greeted friends and acquaintances. I stayed close by, playing the supportive husband, but my eyes were scanning the room for Thomas. I didn't have to wait long. He arrived about 20 minutes later, his tailored suit and cocky grin standing out even among the well-dressed crowd. He didn't see me watching, but his gaze scanned the room until it landed on Laura. I saw her stiffen when she noticed him. She covered it quickly, laughing at something a friend said, but I caught the glance she threw his way. Perfect. As the evening progressed, I bided my time. Laura excused herself more than once, always finding an excuse to slip away. I followed her discreetly, watching as she and Thomas exchanged stolen moments in quiet corners. Their whispers and subtle touches made my blood boil, but I kept my composure. This was all part of the plan. When Laura returned to our table, her cheeks were flushed, her smile brighter than it had been in months. "You're in a good mood," I said, raising an eyebrow. She shrugged, taking a sip of her champagne. "It's a beautiful night. I'm just happy to be here with you." The audacity of her words almost made me laugh. As the night wore on, the host took the stage to make a few announcements. The lights dimmed, and everyone turned their attention to the front of the room. It was my moment. I excused myself quietly, slipping backstage where the AV team was stationed. I'd already made arrangements with them earlier in the day, pretending it was a surprise anniversary video for Laura. They didn't ask questions. They just followed my instructions. I handed them a USB drive and said, "Play this when I give you the signal." With that, I returned to my seat, my heart pounding in my chest. I waited until the speeches were finished, until the host thanked everyone for their generosity and prepared to close the night. Then I stood. "Excuse me," I said, my voice cutting through the room. The host looked surprised but handed me the microphone. "Of course, John. The floor is yours." Laura's eyes widened as I stepped to the center of the room. I could see the unease creeping into her expression. but she stayed seated, her perfect facade firmly in place. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I began, forcing a smile. "This is such a special event, and it's always wonderful to see so many familiar faces. Tonight, I'd like to take a moment to celebrate someone very dear to me, my wife, Laura." The room filled with polite applause. Laura smiled nervously, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. "I've spent the last 10 years of my life with this incredible woman," I continued. "She's smart, beautiful, and, until recently, I thought she was the most loyal person I'd ever met." The room fell silent. Laura's smile faltered, her face going pale. "But as they say, appearances can be deceiving." I turned to the AV team at the back of the room and gave them a small nod. The lights dimmed, and the projector came to life. On the screen, a slideshow began. Photos of Laura and Thomas at Club Nocturn, laughing, touching, kissing. Then came screenshots of their text messages. The ones where she confessed her feelings for him. The ones where she dismissed me as boring and predictable. Gasps filled the room. Laura's face was frozen in horror as the evidence of her betrayal played out in front of everyone we knew. I turned back to the audience, my voice steady despite the rage coursing through me. "I trusted this woman with my heart, my life, and this is how she repaid me, by sneaking around behind my back, lying to my face, and throwing away everything we built together." I faced Laura directly, my voice cold. "You wanted more, Laura? Well, now you have it. More attention, more consequences, and more humiliation than you ever imagined." She stood, her face red with anger and tears. "John, stop this. Please." "No," I said, cutting her off. "You stopped this when you chose him over me, when you decided that I wasn't enough. Now you get to live with the fallout." I dropped the microphone and walked out, leaving Laura standing there, surrounded by the wreckage of her perfect image. I drove home in silence, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly they ached. My heart pounded in my chest, not from regret, but from the adrenaline coursing through me. For once, Laura wasn't the one in control. When I got home, I poured myself a drink and sat in the living room, staring at the wedding photo on the mantel. I picked it up, my jaw tightening as I looked at the smiling faces frozen in time. How naive I'd been back then, thinking we'd grow old together, unshakable in our love. The sound of Laura's car pulling into the driveway snapped me out of my thoughts. A moment later, the front door flew open, and she stormed in, her face streaked with tears. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she shouted, her voice trembling with fury. "You humiliated me in front of everyone." I stayed seated, swirling the amber liquid in my glass. "You humiliated yourself, Laura. I just gave everyone a front row seat to the truth." She stood there, shaking, her hands clenched into fists. "You had no right to do that. No right to air our private lives like that." I laughed bitterly, the sound sharp and cold. "Our private lives? Don't you mean your secret life? Or did you forget about Thomas and your little adventures at Club Nocturn?" Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might break. But then she straightened, her eyes narrowing. "You're no saint, John. You think spying on me, tracking me, going through my phone makes you any better? You're a controlling, paranoid asshole." I stood, my own anger rising to meet hers. "I wouldn't have had to do any of that if you hadn't lied to me. You made me question everything, Laura. Everything. And guess what? My suspicions were right." She took a shaky step back, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I never meant for it to go this far," she whispered. I scoffed, the sound bitter. "That's what you tell yourself to sleep at night? You didn't mean for it to go this far? You planned every lie, every excuse, every rendezvous. You meant for this, Laura. You just didn't mean to get caught." Her shoulders sagged, and for a moment, the fight drained out of her. "I was unhappy, John," she said, her voice soft. "I felt trapped. You stopped paying attention to me. I needed something more." Her words hit me like a slap. "And instead of talking to me, you ran to another man? You destroyed our marriage because you needed more." She didn't answer, her silence louder than any excuse she could have given. I shook my head, the weight of it all crashing down on me. I hope it was worth it, Laura, because there's no coming back from this. I turned and walked past her, heading upstairs to the guest room. I couldn't bear to be near her anymore, couldn't stand the sight of the woman who'd ripped my heart out and stomped on it. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering where it had all gone so wrong. I didn't regret what I'd done at the gala, but the aftermath left a hollow ache in my chest. Laura's tears, her excuses, they didn't matter anymore. What mattered was what came next. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. Laura must have spent the night in our bedroom, or maybe she'd left entirely. I didn't care. My mind was already focused on the next step, making sure everyone knew the truth, not just those who had been at the gala. I started with our closest friends and family. A few had already texted me, their messages ranging from concern to shock. "John, are you okay? What happened last night? Was that some kind of sick joke? Tell me it's not real." I replied to each one with the same message. "It's real. She cheated and now everyone knows." I called my parents, explaining the situation in as few words as possible. My mother's voice cracked with disbelief, while my father let out a heavy sigh. "I can't believe she did this to you," Mom said. "After everything you've done for her." "I don't want pity," I said firmly. "I just thought you should know before you hear it from someone else." When I called Laura's parents, the conversation was far less civil. "What were you thinking, airing your dirty laundry in public like that?" her mother snapped. "Your daughter humiliated me long before I exposed her," I replied coldly. "Maybe you should be asking her what she was thinking." Her father's voice came on the line next, quieter but no less pointed. "John, we're sorry for what Laura did, but don't you think you've made your point? You're only hurting yourself by dragging this out." I hung up without responding. I wasn't about to take advice from the people who'd raised the woman who betrayed me. Next, I contacted a lawyer. If Laura thought she was going to walk away from this unscathed, she was in for a rude awakening. I wanted everything, the house, the investments, even the damn dog. I knew I couldn't let my emotions cloud my judgment, though. My lawyer, a sharp and ruthless professional named Catherine, assured me we could build a case that would leave Laura with little more than her wardrobe. "She's the one who broke the marital contract," Catherine said. "We'll use that to your advantage." I spent hours gathering more evidence, bank statements, emails, and even Laura's Club Nocturn membership records. It was exhausting, but it gave me a sense of control in a situation that had left me feeling powerless. By the end of the day, I'd set everything in motion. That evening, Laura came downstairs, her eyes swollen and red. She stood in the doorway of the living room, hesitating as if she didn't know whether to speak or turn around and leave. "What do you want?" I asked, my tone flat. I wanted to talk," she said softly. I set my glass of whiskey down and folded my arms. "Talk, then." She sat down on the edge of the couch, wringing her hands nervously. "I know I messed up, John. I know I hurt you. But do you really have to destroy me? You've already embarrassed me in front of everyone we know. Isn't that enough?"
Istert daher, incredilis.
"Destroy you? You destroyed yourself the moment you chose him over me. All I did was show people the truth." Her voice rose, desperation creeping in. "I was stupid, okay? I made a mistake, but I don't deserve to lose everything because of it. Don't you?" I shot back, my voice cold. "You didn't just make a mistake, Laura. You made choices, calculated, deliberate choices to lie, cheat, and betray me. And now you want to play the victim." Tears streamed down her face as she shook her head. "I don't know how we got here, John. I don't know how to fix it." "You can't," I said simply. "And honestly, I don't want you to. This marriage is over." Her sobs filled the room, but I felt nothing. No pity, no regret. Just a cold sense of finality. "Pack your things," I said, standing up. "I want you out by the end of the week." She looked up at me, her eyes wide with shock. "Where am I supposed to go?" "That's not my problem," I replied. "Figure it out." I left her there, broken and sobbing, and went upstairs to start planning the next phase of my life. One without her in it. Laura didn't leave right away. True to her selfish nature, she lingered in the house for days, claiming she needed time to figure out where to go. Every moment she stayed felt like a slap in the face, a reminder of the woman I used to love and the lies she'd built our life on. I refused to argue or engage with her unless absolutely necessary. Every time she tried to plead her case, I shut her down. I wasn't interested in her excuses or her sudden remorse. She'd made her choices, and now she had to deal with the consequences. My lawyer, Catherine, moved swiftly. She filed divorce papers and had them delivered to Laura within days. The look on her face when she received them was priceless. A mix of shock, anger, and desperation. "You're really doing this?" she asked, holding up the papers. "Did you think I was bluffing?" I replied coldly. She sat down at the kitchen table, flipping through the documents. "You're asking for everything," she said, her voice trembling. "You're lucky I'm not asking for your dignity," I snapped. "Oh, wait. I already took that at the gala." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't care. For once, I wasn't going to soften just because she cried. As the days went on, I began untangling our lives. I separated our finances, closed our joint accounts, and took her name off every shared bill. I even had the locks changed while she was out, giving her a curt warning that her key would no longer work after she officially moved out. Despite her resistance, Laura eventually started packing her things. I watched as she filled box after box. The life we'd built together reduced to piles of clothing and meaningless trinkets. One evening, as she loaded a box into her car, she stopped and turned to me. "Do you hate me?" she asked quietly. I stared at her for a long moment. "I don't know," I said finally, "but I do know I'll never forgive you." News of Laura's betrayal spread quickly after the gala. Our once tight social circle was split down the middle, those who supported me and those who thought I'd gone too far by exposing her so publicly. I didn't care. Let them judge me. At least I could sleep at night knowing I hadn't spent years lying to the people I cared about. Thomas, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky. His wife, Marissa, had been at the gala that night, sitting in stunned silence as the truth played out on the screen. She filed for divorce the very next day, and rumor had it she was dragging him through hell in court. As for Club Nocturn, word of the scandal had apparently reached its members. I'd heard whispers that Thomas had been quietly removed from the club's inner circle, his reputation tarnished beyond repair. Laura, too, was feeling the consequences. She'd resigned from her charity position, claiming she needed time to focus on personal matters. But I knew the truth. People didn't trust her anymore. The once respected, glamorous Laura was now just another cautionary tale about infidelity and greed. One by one, her friends stopped returning her calls. Even her family seemed to be keeping their distance, ashamed of the spectacle she'd caused. I should have felt vindicated, but all I felt was a hollow satisfaction. Watching her life crumble wasn't as fulfilling as I'd imagined. But it was enough. A week after she moved out, Laura showed up at the house unannounced. I opened the door to find her standing there, looking disheveled in a way I'd never seen before. Her hair was pulled into a messy bun, her face bare of makeup, and her clothes looked hastily thrown on. "What do you want?" I asked, blocking the doorway. I need to talk," she said, her voice cracking. "Please, John, just hear me out." I didn't want to, but something about the way she looked, like a shadow of the confident, polished woman I once knew, made me step aside and let her in. She sat on the edge of the couch, fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. "I don't know where to start," she said finally. "I've lost everything, John. My job, my friends. Even my family barely talks to me now." "That's not my problem," I said, sitting across from her. "You made this mess, Laura. You're the one who blew up our life." She flinched at my words, tears spilling down her cheeks. I know I messed up, but I still love you, John. I miss you." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You don't love me, Laura. If you did, you wouldn't have done what you did. You love yourself and your own selfish desires." "That's not true," she protested, her voice rising. I was stupid and reckless, but it didn't mean I stopped loving you. I was just lost. Lost, I repeated, anger flaring in my chest. You weren't lost, Laura. You knew exactly what you were doing. You lied to my face every day while sneaking around with him. Her face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands. I don't know how to fix this, she whispered. You can't fix this, I said coldly. It's broken beyond repair. And honestly, I don't want you to fix it. I want you to stay out of my life. She looked up at me, desperation written all over her face. Please, John, don't let this be the end. We can try therapy or start over. I'll do anything to make it right. I leaned forward, staring her straight in the eye. There's no coming back from this, Laura. You didn't just betray me. You destroyed the foundation of everything we built. I don't trust you. I don't even know who you are anymore. She sobbed openly, but I felt nothing. The love I'd once felt for her had been snuffed out, replaced by a cold emptiness. I think you should leave, I said, standing. She hesitated for a moment, as if hoping I'd change my mind. But when I didn't, she nodded and stood, wiping her tears. I'm sorry, she said softly as she walked to the door. I didn't respond. As the door closed behind her, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in months, I could finally breathe. The day Laura walked out for good, I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. The house was quieter, emptier, but it was mine again. No lies, no betrayal, just silence. I threw myself into work, into rebuilding the life she'd shattered. I took down photos of us, boxed up her belongings, and even painted over the walls she'd once insisted be just the right shade of cream. But it wasn't just about erasing her. It was about finding myself again. I started going to the gym, reconnecting with friends, and focusing on things I'd neglected in the mess of our marriage. The nights were still hard, the memories creeping in when I least expected them, but each day felt a little easier. 2 weeks after she left, I got a call from Thomas's ex-wife, Marissa. Have you seen the news? She asked, her voice laced with satisfaction.
No.
Why? She laughed bitterly. Thomas got arrested. Turns out his exclusive club was running more than just parties. Laura picked a real winner. I hung up and looked up the story. Thomas had been exposed as the leader of a financial scheme tied to Club Nocturn. His name, and Laura's, were plastered across every headline. For once, I didn't feel anger, just pity. Months later, I stood on my porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine again. If I'd learned anything, it was that betrayal didn't define me. Laura's actions weren't my failure, they were hers. I raised my glass to the fading light. To better days, I said softly. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it.